And guys, in this next news story, a prison inmate did the word beginning with R to a fellow convicted offender after telling him he wanted him to feel like his victims felt. Ramija Hines had been serving a sentence for SA against a teenage girl as she walked home from a chip shop when he committed the brutal attack on his cellmate. It came after the 24-year-old had apparently become disgruntled that the two men were being forced to share a room. He was actually a mere months away from being released from jail at the time of the incident. Liverpool Crown Court heard that Hines was coming towards the end of his imprisonment. This period of imprisonment was imposed for SA after he followed a 17-year-old girl who was walking home from a chip. He pushed her to the ground and forced his hands on her when he ran away when she screamed for help. The complainant in his latest offending was meanwhile serving time in relation to indecent images of kids. The prosecutor described how both men had been transferred to HMP Risley and were sharing a cell overnight on a wing for vulnerable prisoners. Hines, who had taken an illicit substance, then told the other inmates that he wanted him to feel like his victims felt, pushed him onto the bottom bunk bed, told him to take off his pants, and then did art to him. He then retired to his own bed and fell fast asleep. The victim reported the incident to members of prison staff the following morning. When arrested, he had denied that anything had taken place, but his DNA was subsequently discovered on swabs which had been taken from the other prisoner. This led to him being rearrested, at which point he changed his account and said that it was consensual. Hines has a total of 15 previous convictions for 23 offences, and his criminal record includes 2 years in the Young Offenders Institute for robbery and possession of a bladed article in a public place in 2016. His defence told the court both men had been ordered by the prison to share a cell overnight. This is not a case where Mr. Hines engineered a setting where he was alone with the complainant to be able to commit the offence. Mr. Hines was unhappy about having to share a cell, and then he says the offence was committed. He accepts through me that this would have been a very unpleasant and frightening incident for the complainant. He said it's quite clear he has shown remorse and insight into the impact that this would have had upon the complainant in this case. He is still a very young man who has experienced a very difficult childhood and upbringing. It appears there had been moved prisons. He was expecting to be on his own, and he found it a very stressful situation. He took a very foolish and stupid decision to commit this offence in relation to the person in the cell with him. Even though he had an extremely difficult childhood, he went to school and obtained some good qualifications and had a work record. And he also is someone who's been diagnosed with ADHD, depression, anxiety, and the young man has to cope with all of these things. So Hines admitted 1 count of R and appearing via video link at HMP Outcourse. He was jailed for 6 years and 3 months, of which he must serve at least 2/3 behind bars before eligible for release, and handed an additional 5 years on licence. Sentencing judge Catherine Pierpoint said the emotional impact on him has been immense. He has been left wary, anxious and frightened, and he has suffered from nightmares. She said you focused that evening more on your own satisfaction than caring at all for him. While you now show insight and remorse, you do not show any that night. Of particular significance in this case is the conviction you have in relation to the offences of assault and SA, and you took advantage of this man who was in a vulnerable position, locked in a cell with you. He felt intimidated by you. In my judgment, there is an escalation in this case in the seriousness of offending. You are focused on satisfying your own needs and lack self-control. In a particularly concerning that despite the fact that you have carried out these offender treat programs, you still went on to offend that way in the evening. Hines was also handed an indefinite restraining order. And guys, in this next news story, a callous killer who viciously attacked a Hull man, Anthony Ibbotson, in a sustained, vicious, brutal before leaving him helpless in a burning flat, faces a mandatory life sentence after being convicted of murder. Mark Vaskuski claimed that he was only trying to protect himself during the confrontation in Mr. Ibbotson's flat, and he vigorously denied he intended to cause serious harm and that he strangled or throttled Mr. Ibbotson. He claimed that injuries might have been caused to the victim when they fell together, and that when he left the house it was not on fire and Mr. Ibbotson was still conscious. The prosecution then claimed that Mr. Ibbotson, who's 54 years old, would have been left with a reduced level of consciousness after being violently attacked. Mr. Ibbotson died a few days after suffering injuries and burns, Hull Crown Court heard. Vaskuski, who's 27, denied murdering Mr. Ibbotson, but he was convicted by a jury after a trial. The jury returned to court at around 10 o'clock at the beginning of its deliberations, and Vaskuski showed no emotion as the jury foreman announced the guilty verdict, but there were whispers of yes in the packed public gallery. Judge John Thackeray KC told Vaskuski, "You have been found guilty of murder and it will be a life sentence. The length of the minimum term that Vaskuski faces behind bars will be decided at a later sentencing hearing." He was further remanded in custody. The prosecution claimed that Vaskuski viciously attacked Mr. Ibbotson, who is also known as Tony, at his home in Hull, probably after a confrontation about drugs. A fire had broken out in Mr. Ibbotson's bedroom, seemingly from a candle that he was using along with many others for lighting. This was because his electricity has been cut off. The prosecution then claimed that Vaskuski knew that a fire had started in the flat, but he chose to leave Mr. Ibbotson for dead as the blaze took hold. The court heard that just after around 8:30 at night on November the 29th, concerned members of the public alerted the fire service to a flat after they saw smoke billowing from it and heard a noise like snoring or very heavy breathing. They realized that somebody was inside the premises. 2 fire officers wearing breathing apparatus went inside the flat, and after entering the bedroom of the flat, they found Mr. Ibbotson. It was obvious that he had sustained serious and significant burns to large parts of his body, but he was still alive. However, he was suffering from the effects of smoke inhalation. The fire officers also thought there was evidence of other injuries upon Mr. Ibbotson consistent with an assault. He was taken to Hull Royal Infirmary and then onto the regional burns unit. However, he passed away on December the 1st. I just want to say rest in peace. My condolences go out to your family. Pathologists discovered evidence of serious injuries consistent with forceful punches, kicks or stamps, and Mr. Ibbotson had acute brain injuries, including swelling, which was so serious that they would have caused immediate reduced consciousness. December the 13th, Vaskuski was arrested at his home on suspicion of Tony's murder. The court was told that during the police interview, Vaskuski claimed, "I didn't do anything," and he denied that it was him, shown in the clips of CCTV footage that were played to him. Following the verdict, Senior Investigating Officer Detective Chief Inspector Amy Keane Christie of Humberside Police, who led the investigation into Tony's murder, said, "Vaskuski subjected Tony, a vulnerable member of our community, to a needless, brutal and sustained attack, leaving him helpless and alone in his home whilst the fire spread." Vaskuski denied any involvement throughout the course of the investigation, only decided to admit to being present at Tony's home just before the trial. By maintaining his innocence and entering a not guilty plea, Vaskuski subjected Tony's family to unforgivable angst and further trauma. It's without doubt that he's a violent and dangerous man, and without the hard work, tenacity and dedication of the investigation team, Vaskuski would have carried on with his life like nothing had happened, and I am pleased he is now off our streets and can no longer cause harm to our communities. So guys, there's a number of stories coming out from the streets of the UK. It's your boy GT.